Tonight, when you turn off the lights, check your phone one last time and settle into the comfort of modern life. Locked doors, streetlights, and Netflix offering endless distractions. You might feel like you're alone with your thoughts. But in reality, you're taking part in a human ritual that has existed for thousands of years. The only difference is that you're missing the version nobody wants to remember. Most of us think of nighttime as a time to rest, maybe interrupted by a little anxiety. If we spend too long staring at the shadows on the ceiling. 8 uninterrupted hours, wrapped in a memory foam mattress, with a white noise machine humming softly to keep the outside world at a distance. But step outside that bubble for a moment. Strip away the locks, the LED lights, and the comforting belief that everything beyond your walls is safe. And you enter the version of the night your ancestors, faced with extraordinary caution, superstition, and remarkable ingenuity. This isn't the warm, story-filled campfire night. It's the other night, the one buried deep in human memory, filled with unspoken fears, shaped by rituals and guarded by instincts, so deeply rooted that even electric lights can't completely erase them. Bad dreams aren't just for children. That strange feeling that something is watching from the edge of the darkness is ancient, persistent, and deeply human. Welcome to the ancient night no one wants to talk about. Let's start with a simple fact. For most of human history, the night was never neutral. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't, as we often imagine, just a darker version of the daytime. Night was hostile territory, a world so unpredictable and filled with real danger that entire civilizations built their laws, religions, and architecture around protecting themselves from it. Take the ancient Romans. Every evening, the city's main gates were closed. Not for convenience and not for appearances, but because once darkness fell, even the greatest city became vulnerable. Thieves, arsonists, and cutthroats didn't end their day when the sun went down. They were just getting started. Roman law made it illegal to be outside at night without a legitimate reason. The punishment for people caught wandering after curfew was often swift and severe. Sometimes fines, sometimes whippings, and sometimes the kind of immediate justice that never makes it into the history books tourists read. The same was true in medieval Europe. Every evening, towns rang the curfew bell, signaling everyone to cover their hearth fires and remain indoors. The word curfew comes from the old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, ignoring. The warning didn't just increase the risk of your house catching fire. It could also lead to accusations of arson or even witchcraft, charges that in certain centuries could destroy far more than your reputation. In ancient Jerusalem, Jewish law discouraged traveling at night because darkness was believed to belong to evil spirits. The Babylonian Talmud warns that nighttime is when demons multiply. If neighborhoods had community watch alerts back then, the message would have been simple: stay inside or accept the risk of never returning. What made the night so frightening wasn't just the presence of predators or criminals. It was the way darkness erased boundaries. The boundaries that separated civilization from chaos. Once the sun disappeared, city gates became harder to defend. The authority of kings weakened. Every figure in the shadows could be either a friend or someone carrying a knife, and every unexplained sound seemed far more terrifying than it really was. And this wasn't just an urban fear. Across the open grasslands, the setting sun marked a complete shift in the environment. Wolves gathered at the edges of camps, their eyes reflecting the firelight, while the threat of raiders or exile became even more dangerous. For nomadic communities, darkness meant standing guard around the camp, dogs pulling at their leashes, and safety measured by the strength of the circle surrounding the fire. Rural communities in medieval China, sub-Saharan Africa, and the Andes all developed their own traditions for surviving the night. Bring the livestock inside, keep the children close, mark the doors, make sure the last person in bolts them shut. Nearly every ancient culture has a story about something that appears only after dark. In fact, if you wanted to create a map of humanity's collective subconscious, you'd probably begin with a bestiary of creatures whose activity starts the moment the stars appear. The ancient Greeks feared the Lamia, a vengeful, serpent-like night demon said to prey on children. Mothers whispered her name to keep children from wandering after dark. But the fear in those stories was never meant only for kids. The Babylonians feared Lamashtu and Lilitu, female spirits believed to haunt the night and blamed for infant deaths and miscarriages, reflecting deep anxieties about what might threaten the vulnerable while everyone else slept. And the pattern continues. In the Philippines, the aswang, part vampire and part witch, was believed to wait until midnight to transform and hunt the vulnerable. Even during the day, fear of the night was so deeply rooted that families hung garlic, salt, and sharp objects near their doors, an ancient version of home security rooted in folklore. In West African traditions, the night belonged to witches, who could separate their souls from their bodies and ride through the clouds, turning darkness into an uncertain and dangerous landscape for anyone carrying guilt or fear. In Zulu mythology, the night was also home to tokoloshis, mischievous and sometimes dangerous beings believed to crawl beneath low beds. That's one reason some families still raise their bed frames on bricks. As detailed as these creatures were, they all served a purpose. Part warning and part explanation. Why did the baby become sick? Why did the livestock die? Why did someone disappear between sunset and sunrise? In the ancient world, the night became the place where those unanswered questions gathered, mysterious events given names, faces, and stories. A night demon didn't need evidence. Fear itself was enough. And these beliefs weren't just for children. Adults in ancient Egypt wore protective amulets to guard against spirits, believed to roam before sunrise. In Japan, people placed ofuda, sacred paper talismans inscribed with protective characters, near their homes to keep yōkai and restless spirits outside. In Viking Age Iceland, grown men wore Thor's hammer pendants and recited protective spells, not only for good fortune, but to keep the darkness from claiming their souls or their livestock. Even Shakespeare understood this. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, fairies and spirits appear only after the sun sets. In Macbeth, murders and bargains with witches happen under the cover of darkness. After all, no poet in history ever wrote, "And at 2 p.m. terror quietly climbed the stairs." But here's the twist. Darkness wasn't just a backdrop for fear. It also provided cover for everything that was forbidden or inconvenient during the day, both officially and unofficially. Ancient marketplaces didn't always close at sunset. In the narrow streets of Chang'an, now known as Xi'an, and in Cairo's winding souks, night markets stayed busy long after respectable society pretended they no longer existed. Across the Ottoman Empire, the nighttime economy came alive after curfew. Drinks, dice games, street food, and business deals that no respectable person would admit to by morning filled the streets. In Roman cities, the most desperate and the most resourceful worked after dark. Sex workers, thieves, street healers, fortune tellers, and merchants selling questionable remedies all made their living under the cover of night. Even crime followed its own strange order. Fire brigades often doubled as armed militias, fighting both real fires and the gangs that started them for profit. Night watchmen patrolled with hooded lanterns and warning rattles, sometimes serving as honest protectors, and sometimes operating little more than protection rackets. In medieval London, the term night walkers referred both to prostitutes and to the patrolmen, who often took advantage of them, a reminder that the people responsible for policing the night sometimes exploited its hidden spaces as much as they protected them. For ordinary people, the night was often when desperation pushed against the rules. Some jobs, like night soil collectors, existed only after dark. They cleaned the city's waste while everyone else slept, and their presence in daylight was quietly discouraged, creating a clear divide between what society openly acknowledged and what it preferred to keep out of sight. And somewhere in the darkness were those who had nowhere else to go: exiles, runaways, and people escaping the law, their families, or their past. Medieval records are filled with minor crimes committed after the hour of the bell, forbidden romances, secret births, and unauthorized meetings. To live by night was to accept the possibility of disappearing without a trace. The night wasn't just dangerous. For some, it was freedom, a chance to breathe for the outcast, the rebel, or simply the unfortunate. Night wasn't just dangerous because of what existed outside. For the ancient mind, darkness was a tear in the fabric of reality, a time when the body became vulnerable, open to attack, possession, or transformation. Take sleep paralysis. Across cultures, the story is remarkably similar. You wake up unable to move, feeling something heavy pressing down on your chest, an old hag, a night demon, or a malevolent ancestor. The ancient Greeks called this apiali. The Romans feared the incubus and succubus, spirits believed to drain a person's strength, or something even more intimate while they slept. In Inuit tradition, stories tell of the Aktukswak, a spirit that sits so lightly on your chest that you can't breathe. In Renaissance England, the mare in the word nightmare referred to an actual supernatural being, not simply a bad dream. This wasn't considered poor sleep or an overactive imagination. It was believed that the night itself had entered the body, turning the sleeper into both a witness and a battlefield in a conflict that daylight could never explain. The same belief extended to night terrors, unexplained illnesses, and even dreams. For centuries, dreams experienced during the deepest part of the night, especially between about 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., were thought to be more truthful, more dangerous, more prophetic, and more vulnerable to interference from jealous or malicious spirits. There were also nighttime taboos surrounding childbirth, menstruation, and even sex. In ancient Jewish tradition, intimacy during certain hours of the night was discouraged, not because of modesty, but because it was believed to attract the attention of malevolent forces. In some rural communities across Eastern Europe, stories still survive suggesting that children, conceived close to midnight, might face more troubled destinies. It may be folklore, but it's folklore rooted in fears far older than most people realize. This wasn't all cultural superstition. Nighttime was written into the law. Ancient Athenian law treated murder committed at night as an especially serious crime, an offense against both the victim and the city, because darkness was considered sacred to the Furies. The goddesses of vengeance. Medieval English. Law imposed harsher punishments for theft committed after sunset. The Bronze Age Hittites even regulated when and how fires could be lit at night, with penalties for unauthorized fires extending to charges of arson and malicious witchcraft. If you broke curfew, you weren't simply breaking a rule. You were believed to be risking the fragile order that held society together after dark. In certain Indian kingdoms, there was even a recognized class of night criminals, whose survival depended on never being seen during daylight. In Ming Dynasty China, courts issued special regulations for nighttime arrests. Anyone found outside without a lamp or an official permit could face beatings, imprisonment, or even harsher punishment. Castles and walled cities locked their gates not only to keep invading armies out, but also to protect against the uncertainty that came with the night. The guard standing at the gate was more than a watchman. He was the last barrier between civilization and the ancient, unknown dangers that seemed to wait beyond the walls. Some things could happen only at night, for better or for worse. Consider rituals that deliberately embrace the darkness: midnight burials, moonlit healing ceremonies, and ancestor worship performed by firelight with every window covered. Not all of these practices found their way into the history books. Night burials were sometimes necessary for the poorest people who couldn't afford daytime funerals, or for suspected witches, criminals, and plague victims whose graves were intentionally kept out of public view. Across parts of West Africa, Melanesia, and India, nighttime initiation ceremonies guided adolescents into adulthood, beneath a sky that even the elders believed held hidden meaning. The ancient Greek Eleusinian mysteries, the most famous secret religious rites of the classical world, took place entirely at night. Why? Because darkness was believed to be transformative. Without daylight, social hierarchies became less rigid. Class, gender, and age seemed to lose their usual boundaries. For a few hours between sunset and sunrise, people could briefly occupy a different place in society. In ancient Rome, the Bacchanalia, the ecstatic festivals dedicated to Bacchus, were held at night. Breaking social boundaries through celebration, sexuality, and trance, they became such a perceived threat to public order that Roman authorities tried, and ultimately failed, to suppress them. The night gave people permission to live outside the rules, guided by forces that seemed older than the law itself. But nighttime wasn't only associated with excitement or rebellion. In the Andes, the night was believed to be the proper time for dream healing, when sick children were carried into the high grass, beneath the stars, so spirits could intervene. In parts of the Middle East, midnight ziyarat, nighttime pilgrimages to sacred places, offered opportunities for prayers believed to be heard more clearly, whether by God or, according to some traditions, by other unseen forces. Strict social expectations during the day, especially those placed on women, were matched by equally strong fears about women's activities at night. In Athens, Edo period Japan, and colonial Mexico, a woman walking alone after dark was often viewed as someone stepping outside the accepted social order. Independent and, for that reason, deeply unsettling to everyone except herself. That anxiety appears repeatedly in records of witchcraft trials, inheritance laws, trade restrictions, and even rules about who was allowed to gather or gossip after sunset. But, and this is important, the night wasn't only a time of hiding and fear. For some people, it was the only place where they could find comfort. Unfulfilled lovers met in the shadows, outcasts found a sense of belonging, and those who were grieving could finally cry in the privacy of darkness. Great epics, including the Mahabharata and Homer's Odyssey, reserve many of their most devastating decisions for the hours after the fire has burned low. In the Song of Songs we read, "By night on my bed I sought him, whom my soul loveth." The greatest stories understood that the night raised the stakes because no one was watching, and nothing could easily be taken back. Secret meetings, hidden songs, and whispered plans for escape all belonged to the ancient night. So did the quiet safety of a lover's embrace, the conspirators' gathering, and the hermit's prayer. For some, the night wasn't an enemy, it was an opportunity. It is no coincidence that slave rebellions in the Americas, peasant uprisings in feudal Europe, and even political revolutions from ancient Athens to colonial Haiti often began after dark, when the line separating the powerful from the powerless became less certain. Even religion recognized this possibility. The ancient Israelites observed vigils on sacred nights, not simply as ritual, but as an acknowledgement that some of the world's most important work happens while everyone else sleeps. For the Maya, the long hours of darkness were the ideal time to seek the favor of the gods on behalf of the rising sun, offering prayers and sacrifices in a silence so profound it bordered on fear. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes the sun's dangerous journey through the underworld each night, battling monstrous serpents through 12 stages so that dawn could come again. Electric light changed everything. In just a few generations, the ancient night was pushed into the background. Curfews faded, monsters retreated, and darkness became less of a boundary and more of an inconvenience, something to be controlled, scheduled around, or simply ignored. But pause for a moment. When the power goes out, when you walk down a country road beneath a moonless sky, or when darkness settles so completely that you feel, with that familiar sensation at the back of your neck, that you are not alone, something ancient begins to awaken. Goosebumps rise. Your breathing slows. Your footsteps become a little quicker. This isn't nostalgia. It's thousands of years of human instinct coming back to life. And the darkness isn't empty. Wild animals still move through the shadows just as they always have. Secret meetings, forbidden romances, smuggling, and even acts of resistance haven't disappeared. They've simply adapted to the rhythms of the modern world. The difference is that we've forgotten how to talk about them, choosing instead to believe the comforting story that we've completely conquered the night. So what does this ancient night, the one we rarely talk about, really mean? It means that so much of humanity's ingenuity went into holding fear at bay, drawing boundaries, and creating islands of safety and light, that we often forget how much imagination, creativity, and resilience were devoted to surviving the long hours between sunset and sunrise. Every sunset marked the beginning of a different world, one where the familiar became uncertain and even ordinary tasks demanded courage. Night wasn't simply the absence of daylight. It was an environment with its own rules, dangers, and opportunities. It means the line between civilization and the wild was always thinner after dark, and that some things, both good and bad, could happen only under the cover of night. Predators emerged, strangers became harder to recognize, and every unexplained sound carried a story the mind was eager to invent. Yet darkness also offered shelter, privacy, and a rare freedom from the routines of daylight. It became the setting for whispered conversations, sacred rituals, quiet reflection, and the first stories told around glowing fires. It means that every time you switch on a lamp, lock your door, or check your phone at 3 a.m., you're doing more than pushing back the darkness. You're repeating a ritual woven into the very fabric of human civilization. Millions of tiny habits that feel ordinary today were once acts of survival, shaped by generations, who learned that preparation often meant the difference between life and death. Modern technology has made the night predictable, but it has never completely erased our instinctive respect for it. Maybe every once in a while, it's worth remembering what disappeared along with the shadows. Not just the monsters, but the mysteries. Not just the dangers, but the quiet freedoms. The forbidden conversations. The songs, the secret dreams, and the blurred boundaries that made the world just dangerous enough to feel alive. The darkness inspired myths, religions, discoveries, and endless questions about what lay beyond the reach of firelight. Our relationship with darkness has always been a negotiation between the urge to hide and the urge to explore, to fear, but also to understand. The night was, and still is, both an enemy and an invitation. The oldest canvas on which humanity has tried to paint meaning, the ancient night is still with us, hidden in the bones of every story, every fear, and every sleepless hour. We don't talk about it because doing so means looking directly at what we're grateful to have left behind, and perhaps also at what we quietly miss. The lights around us may have changed the world, but they never erased the memories written into human nature. The night remembers, and somewhere deep inside, so do you. So the next time you find yourself sitting in the dark, let it stay dark for just a little longer. Listen to the echoes. You are not alone. You carry both your ancestors' hope and their oldest unspoken fears, holding a torch that guides you through a night that has never completely forgotten its wild nature. Let the streetlights glow outside, but don't rush to drown out the darkness, or ignore that quiet feeling of the ancient night pressing in around you. Acknowledge it. Understand it. Maybe even let it remind you that the darkness has never held only fear and loss. It has always held possibility, untamed, unscripted, and witnessed only by the oldest parts of who we are. That is the ancient night. Not the version we celebrate. Not the one we tell children before bed, but the one we all carry within us, suspended between memory and myth. And when morning comes and the light returns, perhaps you'll remember, if only for a moment, what it truly took for humanity to survive. The night that history so often leaves unspoken.